Good morning, welcome to Overstrand. We've got potentially a really lovely sunrise, and I want to talk to you today about 3 really important things to think about when you're doing seascape photography. Now, there are loads of things you need to think about, I guess, but I'm going to give you my 3 probably most important ones. And the first one is really illustrated brilliantly now. The first thing is to pick the best light, and for me, you may be different, but for me the best light is always just before or just at sunrise. So tip number one, find out what time the sun comes up and make sure you're on location. I normally say an hour before, so that's the first thing that will improve your photography. It's called the golden hour and the blue hour, and they are when the light looks best. So here we are in winter, and sunrise is about 7:10, which is not at all bad really, and you get lovely views like that. Look, beautiful. So that's tip number 1, make sure you're on location when the light's right. Now, it could also be sunset. Sunset works quite well. I personally don't really enjoy sunsets so much. I find the light too orange, and I like this kind of bluey violet light that you get at this time of day. So, but if you like sunsets, and they are great, they are better than midday generally for photography, then find out what time sunset is, get there an hour before and stay an hour afterwards. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, try and find something to photograph. Now, on a beach, it's not easy, but you've generally got stones, pebbles, sandcastles that have been built, and often these are kind of groined sea defences. Now, if you photograph this in the broad daylight, it's not that particularly interesting, but it makes a lovely subject for a sunrise. It gives the eye something to focus on. So find a subject. Once you've done that, think about how you're going to compose it. Now, I could just photograph from where you are now, that kind of works, but there are a couple of things to think about, because the main tip of number 2 is diagonal lines. The diagonal lines are really, really useful. If you photograph something straight on, it can work. Obviously, there are so many rules that you can break in photography, and every single shoot is different. But as a rule, if you're not sure what to do, make your straight line go diagonally across the frame. Diagonal lines are probably the most important thing that I look for if I'm photographing something. I want something to go into the landscape to make it 3-dimensional, and not have it flat, because that just cuts it off. Now, obviously with a seascape, and obviously today's a case in point, the sun or the lovely sky is actually in the wrong position, because I could do with it above my head here, and that would look lovely, but I haven't got it. But compositionally wise, if I had the sun there, that's going to make a better photograph than this one, because that's flat. And if you photograph a groin with it horizontal, it's just going to cut the picture into 2 halves, and there's nothing interesting to look at. So diagonal lines are point number 2. And point number 3, for me, for seascapes, I think long exposures are really, really important. I love that effect. I know a lot of people don't. Some people don't, and you don't have to do it all the time. If I've got waves that are crashing in over some boulders, a faster shutter speed will work better, but you need a certain amount of blur. But generally, these peaceful seascapes that I try and create, long exposures work best. So at the moment I've got a 3-second exposure, which isn't too bad. I normally go to something like 10, so what I've got for that is a grad in my bag, and that will darken everything down. The other thing that I'm doing is shooting at f/22. Now, the more you stop down the aperture, the longer the shutter speed will be to get the exposure correct anyway. So that kind of works in your favour. And I'm exposing to the right on the histogram. And that looks a bit flat to me, so what I'm going to do, the composition looks a bit flat, is why it's not working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over here a little bit and have a little look at making a more of a diagonal. Trying to get the sun in, but I think I'm going to have to abandon that because it's just not going to work. But we're trying to get a nice, tranquil, serene kind of seascape. So let's see if I can move over. Having said all that, the shot I'm going for, which I think is going to be the best composition today, is actually almost horizontal, and that's because the sun is directly above those groins there. I've gone for a 65-24 crop, and I've gone quite wide because what I want to try and do is get the beach huts, which have got some lovely light kicking off the side of them. So I'm just going to compose this up a little bit better. I don't want to lose the light, that's why I'm kind of panicking a bit. Now, I need really to either bracket this or put a grad on. Now I'm going to put a grad on because that's going to slow down the shutter speed, which as I've already said, I quite like that blurred water effect, so that kind of works really well. Okay, so I've got my holder. Just going to rest these on here. I'm going to go with a 3-stop grad. I mean, the sun is behind that big bank of cloud, but it's still bright enough that we could get a little bit of overexposure, which isn't the worst thing in the world, a little sunspot like that. Going to shoot f/22, the other benefit of that is it's going to allow me to create a bit of a starburst maybe. So put the grad on the top, and that's going to have the, oops, make sure your camera's level. So the composition looks good, and the grad is just going to give me a little bit more, hold back a bit more of that sun there. Check the focus. So looks dark, but the histogram looks okay. I'm just going to go, I'm going to move the histogram a little bit to the right, so it's going to go a little bit lighter. So slow the shutter speed down and potentially give me a bit of overexposure, but I can check with the highlights on the right hand side. And that probably breaks all of the rules that I've been talking to you about today. But I reckon that will be the best shot of the morning. Different thing to illustrate today because of just the nature of where the sunrise is, but I personally think, first of all, rule number 1, be here at the right time, be there in the best light, often at sunrise. So that's rule number 1. That's probably the most important rule, actually. Rule number 2, try and make diagonals. Haven't illustrated that brilliantly today, but I will do. I will show you some pictures now that I've taken before at a place called Mersey, and see if I can't in the office show you what I mean. And rule number 3, for me, long exposures work really well on seascapes, unless. And there's always, and all of those rules can be broken, there are countless others. If you are on a beach where there are lots of rocks and pebbles and, well, it's very, very wild, there's been some beautiful wave pictures that I've seen from all sorts of people. Ed Allen, Rachel Tallybart's very famous for it, and they look, and Sophie Carr, they look lovely. And they are kind of tenths, eighth of a second exposures of waves that look like some kind of Greek or Roman gods coming out of the sea, which I love that. But for this kind of tranquil, relaxing, peaceful kind of seascapes, which I quite like, minimalism almost, long exposures work really well. So that would be my third tip really. And the lights hanging around here, there's some lovely light on the cliffs in the distance, which I'm going to now kind of zoom in and do another few pictures. So I'll leave it there. Thanks ever so much for watching. If you haven't seen anything else on my channel, there's loads of content to enjoy if you like landscape photography and seascape photography. So I'll leave you to have a little look at that. I'll put a link at the back of this. So here come the images. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe if you haven't. See you next week. Goodbye.